on this day, the 15th of February, 1971. On this day, the British pound was decimalised, changing it from the original 20 shillings, which were made up of 12 pence each, for a total of 240 pence per pound, to 100 pence per pound, each new penny being equivalent to 2.4 old pence. As Ireland was in a currency union with the United Kingdom at the time, this decimalisation day occurred throughout the British Isles and changed currency completely and forever. Decimalisation had been something that had been going on with other currencies for a few hundred years at this point. The Russian currency, the ruble, was the first to be decimalised, and way back in 1704. The British had seen the decimalisation of the French franc. It was a new currency that was introduced during and after the French Revolutionary period. And so a lot of reformers, as they tend to do, wanted to copy the French and do what they did. Another one was Metricization, introducing metric weights and measures to replace the customary weights and measures. So in 1824, the British Parliament had rejected a proposal to decimalize the pound sterling. And following this, there wasn't much progress, they say progress, towards decimalisation for the British pound. And at the time, it wasn't really seen by many as being necessary, considering the pound was the currency of the world at the time. And most of the world at that point still hadn't got around to decimalising their own currencies. So, around the Great Exhibition in 1851, some people in Britain were thinking that international trade with other countries would be made easier if it went from using 12 as the denomination down to 10. So instead of 240 pennies, 100 pennies. Makes things easier. 1, 10, 100, and onward. And this is also the argument for the metric system as well. However, there was resistance. People liked their own old currency. They liked their currency. They were used to it. I remember talking to my grandmother about it, and she would learn the 12 times table. And one of the big reasons they used the 12 times table and learned it was because that's how they would figure out currencies and how to give change and what change they should be getting. And it wasn't just the pennies, it was also the halfpennies and the farthings and the sixpences. And so it seems to me like to have been a very interesting currency. One far more interesting than the old boring 110 one that we have now. And they had interesting names for them. Now we have 1p, 2p, 5p, 10p, 20p, 50p pound. Or in other countries there's like the euro, the cent, 5 cent, 10 cent, 20 cent, 50 cent. All very, I suppose, easy you could say. But it's very, also it lacks something that's interesting. Whereas the old pound, you had shillings, then you had florins, and the florin and the double florin were introduced actually around the time of the Great Exhibition because they thought this would help towards decimalizing currency. But you had florins, you had sixpences, You had threepenny bits. I love that name, threepenny bit. Like, isn't that 5p or 2p does not hold anything compared to saying a threepenny bit. How cool is that? And then there was the penny, the halfpenny, halfpenny, called it halfpenny, and farthing, which was a quarter of a penny. And then they also, way back when, had a groat, which I think was not quarter, an eighth of a penny, I think. But that was discontinued quite a long time ago, and so I think even by the time when decimalization came in, the florin had disappeared, the halfpenny was still there, but that was probably not long for this world either, because of inflation. So, with the pound being the reserve currency of the world, there was little attempt to change the system. Things seemed to be going well. And when Britain had the Pax Britannica and ruled much of the world and had the largest navy and was able to guide how things went, everything was fine. Although I've heard and I've listened to many different people and read about this. Apparently, having a reserve currency is great, but everyone with a reserve currency ends up wrecking their currency because they end up getting lazy, because they know they can use the fact that it's a reserve to bolster their own wealth in the short term. The two world wars did some damage to the position of the pound, the First World War and then the Second World War especially. But even up until the 60s, about 25% of all reserves in the world was still kept in pound sterling. So it hadn't lost completely. Like right now, 21% of the world's reserves are in euros. Much of it's probably European money, but still, the pound sterling had more back in the 60s. It was really post-war government policy that wrecked the position of the pound and led to massive inflation and devaluations. So now, pound sterling is about 4 or 5%, which is still kind of good. You know, the yen has about the same, and they said the euro is about 21%, and then there's a lot of other currencies with 1-2%, the Canadian dollar and the Australian dollar. And the American dollar is about just over 50%. So it really was the government policies in the 40s, 50s and 60s that took the pound down in terms of being a serious currency in that way. In 1960, there was a new attempt to decimalize the currency. This time it would end up working. So, a report by the British Association for the Advancement of Science and the British Chambers of Commerce had looked at the decimalization that happened in South Africa, where they went from a South African pound to the new rand, a decimalized currency. They had decimalized on using the shillings as the equivalent of the new 10 cents. So the old currency had 20 shillings. The new one basically halved the value of the currency to the new currency, which is the rand. And instead of 12 shillings with 12 pennies in a shilling, it would be 10 cents in the new 10 cents coin. So, and Australia and New Zealand would also do the same sort of thing. But the British government thought, and people involved with this, because the pound was still a reserve currency, that it should keep its same value, but just change by making 2.4 old pence into worth 1 new pence. So revaluing up the penny. That was how it was supposed to go, although since 1971, decimalization, well, I'll leave that until afterwards. So from 1968, new coinage started to be introduced, and 10 shilling notes were withdrawn in 1970. The 10p coins and the 5p coins, which were introduced in 68, as well as a 50p coin, which is equivalent to 2 shillings. It gets very complicated, trying to work out what was what. And various coins were then withdrawn, others started to be introduced, and they started in the months before putting prices in new and old currency. They chose February the 15th because apparently February at the time, maybe even now, was the quietest banking month. So they thought, it's going to be busy, we don't want to do it at Christmas because that would be insane. So they chose February. February the 15th, right smack dab in the middle. Apparently, decimalization was considered to be a great success. It went relatively smoothly, and that was that. The old pounds, shillings, and pence were gone, replaced by the pennies 1, 2, 5, 10, 20, 50. Things just got beige. Whilst growing up, I had never seen a shilling, or a farthing, or a halfpenny, or a threepenny bit, or a sixpence, or any of that. But they still exist in our literature, in our stories, and in the memories of older people. And so, whilst reading things or watching things, films and dramas, and there'd be references to farthings. There's references to sixpence in a Christmas pudding. There's references in Dickens to a shilling or a penny or a halfpenny, farthing. These terms are used all the time in our literature. And I had no idea what they were talking about. So what is that? I kind of knew it was some sort of money thing, but I had no idea at the time that that used to be our money. And that's how we did things, and a lot of our phrases and come from money. The old terms for money, quid, bob. It's without knowing why we have these phrases or why or what these things were, it's very difficult to actually understand what is it they have there. How much is that worth? I don't know. Is it a lot? Is it nothing? No idea. And so I actually did some research on the old currency, and it was interesting. It was interesting that it still has so much relevance in the way we talk about money. I can read things now that were written before decimalization, which is almost everything worth reading, and I can kind of understand what they're talking about when they refer to money. And it's just always present in literature and history. So trying to understand our grandparents and great-grandparents without understanding how they understood money makes us foreigners to history. And so my big thing is that I feel that I have been robbed of this old way of doing something I will never experience. And I think it is a great pity. And people talk about diversity a lot, but they never really talk about the diversity that I think would make a difference. Things like this. They want to standardize everything. They want to get rid of the old money. They want to get rid of the old weights and measures. They want to make everything the same and standardized across the world. And no difference will be tolerated. That to me seems the opposite of diversity. And I think it is a shame that all of this happened and there was so little fight back. There was a bit. I've talked to some people about this, and apparently there was a lot of people who didn't like the idea, who did complain. Obviously they didn't complain enough or hard enough, and the people in power seemed to want it, so they got it. The same thing happened in Australia and New Zealand and South Africa, and a lot of places they put this forward as, oh, we're modernizing. We're going to be modern and cool and up-to-date. We're not going to be fuddy-duddies and old-fashioned. We're going to be new and interesting and cool. That's the argument from what I've seen that was put forward many times. And the same happened in Britain. And so for a lot of people, they thought, oh, maybe it would be better, maybe it would be easier. But the British pound since 1971 has lost 92% of its value. A pound in 1970 is worth something like 0.07 pence now. So it's not even worth a penny. It's incredible how much value it's lost. And that's probably not because of decimalization. I don't think it is. But it does show you that it doesn't actually make things better. That changing something just to change something, well, didn't work. Maybe if they hadn't changed it, maybe it'd be worth a bit more. Maybe it wouldn't have devalued by 92%. I don't know. But I do know that it has devalued by 92% since it was decimalized, since the change. So has it been effective? Has decimalization done anything worth it? I don't think so. I don't think it's made any difference. It may have made it easier for foreigners coming in, that they didn't have to work out how to use a new currency. And maybe it's slightly easier for children to learn how to use it. But is that really the end of all of this? That we want to make things easier? Well, it is what it is. Our currency changed forever, and we had to change with it. If you like these videos, come back for more tomorrow. Like, comments, and subscribe.